Good evening. I'd like to call to order the September 12th, 2022 Zoning Commission meeting. Time is 7 o'clock. We're in Genoa Township Hall. Agenda items for tonight, zoning case 2022-01, Romanelli and Hughes, the third meeting, and zoning case 2022-05, CRI out parcels. Staff present tonight, Joe Schaefer and Paul Benson. Joe, the roll, please.
Roll call, Mr. Bishop. Here. Mr. Carter. Here. Mr. Leff.
Here.
Mr. Sears.
Here.
Mr. Welch.
Here.
And I will note that Ms. Walsh contacted me a little bit before the meeting and told me she was not going to be able to make it this evening.
Okay, very good, thank you. Statement of policy, this meeting may be recorded. Such recordings are public record, may be posted online, and could be subject to review in court. As is the adopted policy of the Zoning Commission, all applicants will be granted an opportunity to make their formal presentation. The audience may be then granted an opportunity to comment, followed by the applicant's response and questions from the commission. The chairperson may limit repetitive debate and reserves the following rights: to limit comment to the items on the agenda, to limit public comment to 5 minutes per person, to restrict the number of times a member of the public is permitted to speak, and to enact any other reasonable ad hoc protocols or measures necessary to maintain a fair, safe, and orderly meeting. This policy was adopted by the Commission to provide for the respectful, constructive, and efficient discussion of business scheduled for consideration and to allow for proper due process as required by law. First item on the agenda is the minutes from the previous meeting. We're looking at the July 18th, 2022 meeting. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the July 18th, 2022 minutes as presented.
Do I have a second? Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. Discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
I sent something to you. I don't know if you had a copy of it. I think he sent it to you. But basically, I wanted to add a little additional part into what I said because the essence of my point was left out. Did you read that?
Yes.
Are you in favor of adding that to the minutes?
I was okay with what Mr. Schaefer wrote back, with that not every single thing word for word is always put into the minutes, and so the record is the audio. Mr. Schaefer, did you have a chance to want to expand on that, or?
No, staff wasn't going to take a position one way or the other. I mean, we do not write them verbatim other than the motions. We do our best to capture what we believe is the spirit and intent of the conversations, but certainly if the commission feels like an edit needs to be made, staff is willing to do that. We just need to know exactly what you want written in there, word for word.
I don't recall the email now. Did it go just to me or did it go to everybody?
No, the response I sent to Mr. Carter, I just copied yourself and Mr. Welch on as chair and vice chair, just so you were aware that this potential discussion item might come up.
Okay, so the point is Mr. Carter wanted included into the written form of the minutes some additional comments that he had made in the last meeting. Do you want to expand on what those are and then let us decide if we include them?
Sure.
Okay.
I just said, because it's, it's under my name is what I said type thing, the review of the minutes. Just Mr. Carter specifically mentioned that the Genoa Township zoning resolution 103.03 allows townships to ensure the compatibility of land uses which either are adjacent or in proximity to each other, and that the zoning resolution 103.08 states implement the recommendations of the Genoa Township Comprehensive Plan and the Ohio Revised Code 51902 gives townships the right in accordance with the comprehensive plan to determine lot size and density of population. The reason I wanted to include that was because that was really left out of what was the essence of mine, and then your comments were next, which said that, really that you weren't putting weight into the comprehensive plan, and I was just pointing out that the zoning resolution allowed us to go to the comprehensive plan to help us determine our decision.
So, I mean, from my perspective, that meeting and that hearing is closed. Now, the question is whether or not can we retroactively add commentary.
Yeah.
I don't think we can, but I mean, your statement is noted on the record now, effectively. So,
right. And that's basically what I said. But either way,
I think we go down a dangerous path if we're going to. And I'm not saying this is a wholesale rewrite of your commentary or addition to your commentary, but I mean, the minutes are what they are. There's no way to physically take verbatim minutes for us to adopt. And the minutes aren't the official. I mean, we all know this is going to litigation. So the recording is what is ultimately going to be used if it's transcribed for litigation purposes.
My point being, I'm not trying to add in something later, I'm just trying to have put in there what I did say. So either way, we've got it on the record now, and I've
Right.
put it there, but, you know, I think for those minutes, that's important to have that type of thing in there.
I understand why you're asking, Jim, but the audio recording is considered the final piece.
Right, and I
So
understand that, yes, absolutely, so it's
so-
there, we've got it now.
I don't think it's substantive. There wasn't anything that was not quoted properly at this point, which is where we're,
Which is left out.
again, the audio recording is the official
Yeah,
transcript.
right, exactly, I just wanted to just make that point,
Okay.
because it kind of transferred from mine to yours, and it was kind of like, there's something left out here. But if you want to, I mean, the audio is what the, if
At
it does.
this point, I'm not in favor of moving it forward. I would like to, I would
I agree. I
vote
think-
on what we've got from as presented, but I don't think it's a substance.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think to Chip's point is, you know, the minutes are already done. And you said the audio is already the final say, so I'm fine with the way things are right now.
My last comment is we do vote to approve or not approve the minutes, so I'm assuming that we're supposed to read them and determine their accuracy. So, but I'm good with just what I read on there is fine.
Okay.
And it's in the audio, so I'll
Any
withdraw
other-
my request.
Okay, any other commentary?
Just from my perspective, looking through the minutes earlier, I think as a whole, they captured the essence of what was being said. Now, the big thing with getting it on the record now, I think clarifies where you stood with it. But I agree with Chairman Leff. I don't think we need to wholesale revise the minutes to include it.
Sure. Point taken. Mr. Shaver, roll, please.
Roll call, Mr. Bishop,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Sears,
Yes.
Mr. Welch,
Yes.
Mr. Leff.
Yes. Motion passes. Thank you. Time is now 7:07. We will call to order Romanelli and Hughes Building Company requesting an approval of a final development plan amendment to eliminate a pedestrian path and play area on 2.85 acres at 4505 Speranza Loop, Galena, Ohio 43021, open space of Mirasol Section 2, lot number 7967. Currently zoned planned residential district, PRD, zoning case number 2022-01, previously tabled on April 11th, 2022. For those wishing to speak tonight, please rise to be sworn in. Anybody that will speak on this hearing alone? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Be seated. Legal notice for this meeting was printed and published on September 1st, 2022 in the Delaware Gazette and posted at the General Township Hall on August 17th, 2022. An attempt to mail notice of this hearing to property owners within 500 feet of the subject property was also made. The following exhibit was added, Exhibit Number L, which is an untabling request which was received on August 15th, 2022. Mr. Schaefer, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have an updated memorandum or tech review from last spring for you because there's really no changes. So what I'm going to do is just to sort of refresh everyone's memory, just remind everyone why we're here this evening, although the legal description pretty much spelled it out. So the developers of Mirasol, Romanelli and Hughes, getting close to the closing up the development. One of the items that they're supposed to be installing is a playground and trail system in the central green space of the open space you see here depicted on the screen there. So you can see the stormwater pond, and just to the left of that pond, you can see where the open space ties into the street, and maybe Paul Benson can move the mouse to just sort of, sorry, Paul, hover over where, I didn't realize you were stepping away, hover over sort of where I'm talking about real quick. So there's the stormwater pond, and just to the left of that, Paul's gonna hover over where the playground and trail connection we're gonna tie in right in through there. So essentially what the developer's asking is to remove this improvement from the development plan in its entirety. They've been in discussion with my office about this area for years. There's been a few different revisions made to it over the time, and the developer has essentially told us that they've just come to the conclusion that there doesn't seem to be a demand or interest, or at least not enough throughout the neighborhood as a whole to warrant putting it in. So as you recall at the last meeting back in the spring when this initially was discussed, this was brought before you, and many residents came out and had some questions and concerns about it. And at that point, the applicant requested a tabling so they could sort of go back to the drawing board and maybe determine whether or not they were going to go forward with this request, and if they were, sort of how they maybe spend more time talking to the residents. So it's my understanding the developer has spent a lot of time communicating, meeting with residents, trying to get feedback from them, hence why they're back in front of you this evening. So as it stands, the request to remove the path and playground still remain as is. There's really been no changes to the proposal. I do understand that the developer believes that they've got an agreement in place with the residents, but they didn't document it into the zoning materials because it's really a private agreement between them and the residents of the plan, but I will let them speak to those specifics. So I think that's really all I have to report on this one. I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman, unless you have any questions.
Not yet. Guys, all right, come up. This is your reminder, name and address, and then
Jim Olin, 148 West Rock Road, Westerville, with Romanelli Hughes.
My name is Joe Libby. I'm with EMH&T, 5500 New Albany Road, Columbus, Ohio, 43054.
who's yours?
I think Joe summed it up. When we came back in February, we thought we had agreement with residents, and after our meeting, it was clear that we needed to go back and make sure that we were all on the same page. And so we have done in-person meetings. We have done numerous phone calls. We've sent out surveys and tried to get an understanding of what is it that the residents want. Our initial objective was to say, here's the money that was going to be spent on the bike path and the path in the play area, and the HOA can do with it what they want. Because there was some opposition, we wanted to go back and verify that, hey, we have a plan moving forward. So with the survey, when the survey came back, it was a little different than what I anticipated. There were a few more people who had checked a box and looking for comment, went back and made phone calls to every single resident who checked the box that they still wanted a play area and a path. And it was very interesting in those conversations. Some were a misunderstanding, some were, hey, I'd like it, but it's not a big deal. So we worked through all those residents who had any concerns, and we've come to an agreement with the residents of, not only the residents, but the homeowners that are under contract as well, for Mirasol to move forward without the path in the play area. And I'm confident you'll see that today.
So no other changes, nothing else to add to the
No.
map, nothing other than the original submission?
Nope.
Okay. Nothing else to add?
I have nothing to add. I'm here to answer questions.
We're going to go to the audience. Public comment. Anybody wishing to speak? Come on up to the mic. Please state your name and address. Go from there.
Steve Pfeiffer, 6717 Via Florenza Drive in Galena. I am not in favor of the playground or the path. And I was going to bring this up earlier, but didn't have a chance to at the last meeting. And I have some handouts here if I can give them to you. I don't know what all the zoning rules are for the township. But if it's not a zoning rule, just something that maybe should be considered, is how close that playground would have been to the retention pond, and also to the left, right at the beginning, is a picture of what that is a area where it's the overflow from the one retention pond that goes into the next retention pond. And the pictures that I gave you are actually, I took those on September 4th, 2022 at 10:45 a.m. And that always had cattails growing in that area before, which from my experience in my career, I know if there's cattails in a retention area, then that means there's water. And I don't know why they were cut down, but It actually is a good thing. They were cut down, and there's clearly water after it rained the prior day in that area. And my concern is, when I got home that day and read the paper on my way home, I pulled up that there was a 4-year-old little girl in Columbus that drowned in a retention pond the day before. And since then, there have been 2 other children since September 3rd that have also drowned in retention ponds. One of them this past weekend. And I know that that's Columbus, but I'm also not naive enough to understand that it doesn't matter where you live, what the community is, but the little kids explore. And if they're used to going there to go play on a playground, and they get out of the yard without someone knowing they're gone, and I'm not saying anyone in our community is not responsible. I'm not saying that. But things happen. Children die every day from drowning. I don't know if it's every day, but in pools, retention ponds, all over. And it only takes a second to lose track of a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old child. And if they're used to going down there to a playground, and they decide to go down into that little area, that's not a lot of water, but if they went down there, they slipped and fell and hit their head, they could drown in a matter of minutes. And not only that, from there, the path would go around to the retention pond. So all I'm doing is asking you today. I am not for that because I don't want to ever think that if I was able to stop one child from drowning in that area, then that's a good thing. And I would also ask for the zoning commission to think about, is there any kind of guidance for future playgrounds or anything like that around bodies of water for the township? Because if it isn't, I think that's something that we ought to look into, because we do not want to lose one child. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer, do we have our clock?
No, apologies, I can keep track on this.
Either you can do it or I can.
How
do
much
it.
how many time did you want? 5? Okay.
We're at 5. Anybody else? Okay.
Hello, Lisa Hample, 6818 Via Florenza. I just wanted to let you know that I am opposed to the playground and the path. I wanted to thank Jim Olin for all of his efforts to understand what's important to our community. And I think that this is what's important to our community, to eliminate those 2 things from the plan. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we got a letter about this. Oh.
Name and address, please. Thank you.
You're welcome. Charles Glass, 6551 Lewis Center Road. We live on the other side of Lewis Center Road. We look at Marisol. We've watched this subdivision take shape for several years now, and we think it's beautiful. We think it's well done. We've gotten acquainted with a number of people over there, and to my surprise, they're really nice people. I thought anybody could afford a house in there, they're gonna be snobbish. And I'm just a dirt farmer. And my daughter has started playing pickleball with a group, so there are 4 generations of us living across the road right now, and we're the youngest is the 8th generation in this township. So I just want to say that we're happy with the type of building that's going on. We're happy with the subdivision. And if Romanelli and Hughes want to make a change, we support them in it. And as the patriarch of our family, I speak for all of them. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, I'm
Jeff Brader, 6569 Via Florenza. I was here in February. I wanted to come back just to thank the trustees that you tabled it in February. What I didn't like at the time was the fact that it was being proposed for the change, and all the homeowners were not engaged with their opinion. All I ask is that in the future, that anytime something happens, and you guys did table it, and because of it, I think some favorable things happened. Because what was happening was it was pitting neighbors against neighbors in that community because everybody was not engaged as far as their opinion, as far as what should be done with eliminating it or keeping it. So I was here at the time I was opposing not making a change. I was saying, let's table this and have a discussion. You guys and gals also, you tabled it. I appreciate that. And they did engage everyone and came up with a consensus among the homeowners. And because of that, now everyone's pretty much in agreement with what needs to be done there. I also would ask in the future, any development that's going in, if there's a proposal in the plans to put in amenities and pathways and things like that, encourage the builder to put them in advance. There's no question then what's going to be there, where it's going to be, or anything else. So encourage them to get those things done before they even start their subdivision. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm Rob Walker at 6818 Via Florenza, and I just want to concur with the other speakers here that I totally agree with them. I walk my dog around. Another point I was just going to make that there's a playground over at Sheffield I walk around a lot, and their playground, not all the time, but people leave trash out there, you know, and I don't know who would police this, you know, and that would be my concern. That's why one of the reasons I kind of oppose the playground, besides the fact that I think it's a real liability there. I don't want anybody getting hurt in that pond, so that's all I have to say, basically. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. All right, public comments closed. Back to the board. Comments, questions?
I had a safety question for Mr. Olin. I realize this is not a zoning issue, but, and maybe stormwater won't allow it, but is it, looking at the size of this pipe, I could see a kiddo trying to crawl in there. Is it possible to put a grate on the ends of these drain tiles so that kids can't get in there? I don't know if it's permitted by stormwater or, and I realize it's not a zoning issue, but I put that on your radar that may be something to consider.
I got partial answer. Haven't been doing this for, I don't know, 30-plus years. It's just not a standard. It's, you know, the stormwater and all of that criteria is regulated by Delaware County engineers. My guess is they would not be in favor of that.
Okay.
They tend to collect debris and become a maintenance item that somebody needs to come out and clean them up, so they prefer not to put them in.
But as far as the standing water there, that's something we're obviously going to look at, so we will.
Thank you.
The only comment I have is I was here as an alternate for the last meeting where it was tabled, and one of the things that I've noticed just in the time that's elapsed is I want to commend you guys for reaching out to the homeowners, because since I've been in this position, have not seen the kind of consensus that I've seen here tonight, and so I just want to commend you on that. That's the only comment I had.
To Mr. Spiker's comments, I read the same article that you read about, you know, the child drowning, and actually 8 people have drowned in that, and it's right off the edge of an apartment. It has a steep embankment. It's nothing like the ponds we have around here, but driving down Old 3C, I looked at all the ponds. Some are fenced or some are not fenced. And I don't think we have any kind of rule on that, do we, Mr. Schaefer? Fencing?
No, the fencing's always a tricky issue because the assessment I always give is you put a fence around it, it makes it more difficult for someone to get in, but it also makes it more difficult for someone to respond to should someone get in.
Right, okay.
It's always, it's a little bit of a catch-22 there.
Because my only thought on what you said was that, if the HOA got money from the playground and all that, maybe if you wanted to install your own for the time being, since there's not a zoning thing that, or something the township would require, et cetera, but
Yes,
certainly a
I
good
wouldn't
source.
tell them no if they wanted to do that.
Right, but you have good information as to why you may not want to, and the people whose houses are right there may or may not want a fence around it also. So those are all those considerations I'd make. With this, I remember some ponds have like a safety shelf.
They do.
So does this have a safety shelf? So in other words, if you fall in, you've got this much, 3 feet, and you're in 12 inches of water, is that
Yeah,
basically?
that's the idea.
So that's one, I think that makes this pond safer than probably that one I
The
saw.
older ones, right.
Than the older ones, and they don't have the steep embankments, you kind of keep it correct way.
That's exactly right.
That's all.
I just want to commend Romanelli and Hughes too. You listened, I think you were a little surprised from what I remember at the meeting, at some of the responses you were getting. And, you took action and took your time. And I think that's what we need in the township is developers that listen to the township. And you did. You took the time to talk to the residents, and I commend you.
You have some sort of like written agreement with the HOA at this point, or is it all verbal?
It's all verbal, but we'll take care of it.
Okay. Doesn't need to be a record with us. I just want to make sure that you've taken care of it. So thanks for having the conversations. No divergence reviews.
Correct, there's no divergence review. We didn't get any official position paper from the applicant regarding whether or not they believe this should be a major or minor amendment. I don't know if they want to put anything on the record before the commission gets into that portion of their review. Regarding whether it's a
major
whether you
or
think it's,
minor?
whether you think it should be considered a major amendment that would have to go to the trustees for final approval, or whether or not you think it's a minor amendment.
Minor. Very
I always like to give the applicant the opportunity to put their,
Or minor.
Minor because you just say it is, right? Okay. Anything else you'd like to add before we actually do that review?
I have nothing to add.
Nothing to add. Mr. Welch? Would you like to lead this portion, please?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. Pursuant to section 2710.03, should a final development plan amendment request represent a substantial departure from the intent of the original proposal, i.e. a major amendment, said modification or amendment shall be subject to the submission requirements and procedures set forth herein. The following shall be considered substantial departures from the original application, and following review and recommendation of the zoning commission shall be subject to final consideration by the township trustees. A significant change in the use or character of the development. B, a significant increase in overall coverage of structures. C, an increase in density, D, an increase in the problems of traffic circulation and public utilities. E, a significant reduction in approved open space. F, a reduction of required off-street parking and loading space. G, a reduction in required pavement widths. Or H, a reduction of the acreage in the planned development. And Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing where any of the requested modifications to the final development plan fall under any of those requirements or subsections.
Anybody have any discussion points to that?
I agree, and also there's a consensus of the residents. If it was really split down the middle, it might throw it to the trustees to let them figure it out. But in this case, like Chip said, everything is within, none of those things apply. So I think a minor would be appropriate.
So yes, Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the following, the subject final development plan amendment application, including all plans and materials which have been deemed by this commission to be minor amendment pursuant to section 2710.03, submitted by Romanelli and Hughes Building Company to not construct a pedestrian path and play area on approximately 2.5 acres.
Let's do the major and minor first. Not the full approval.
top of page 4.
Top of page 4.
Top of page 4. My bad, I apologize.
All right.
So I would move to declare the subject final development plan amendment application Romanelli and Hughes, zoning commission case number 2022-01, including all plans and materials, a minor amendment of the final development plan pursuant to section of the Genoa Township zoning resolution, thus not requiring subsequent action by the Board of Trustees. This motion is being made for the following reason, because their requested plan amendment does not fall under any of the subsections of section 2710.03 of the zoning resolution, indicating that it would be a major amendment.
Second?
Discussion? Mr. Schaefer?
Roll call, Mr. Bishop.
Yes.
Mr. Carter. Mr. Sears. Mr. Welch.
Yep.
Mr. Leff.
Yes. Motion passes.
Now I would move, one more hoop to jump through. I would move to approve the following, the subject final development plan amendment application, including all plans and materials which have been deemed by this commission to be a minor amendment pursuant to section 2710.03, submitted by Romanelli and Hughes Building Company to not construct a pedestrian path and play area on approximately 2.5 acres of property located at 4505 Speranza Loop, Galena, Ohio, 43021, currently zoned Planned Residential District, PRD, Zoning Commission Case Number 2022-01, incorporating Exhibits A through L and any comments made by the applicant during this hearing. Including the following commitment to negotiate with the homeowners association to compensate the home HOA by transferring the funds allocated for the playground and walking path, those funds to be transferred to the HOA.
Can I add something to that? Because I think it should be negotiate with the residents versus the HOA, only because the HOA I'm still in control of. So I think it should be worded in such that we've agreed to.
I will amend my motion to negotiate with the residents to transfer those funds to the HOA.
For the residents.
Can you transfer the funds to the, I don't think you can transfer the funds to the residents.
I think they have a private business dealing in place with the existing and under contract residents where they may be dealing with each one of them individually. So I think that's why he's suggesting that. So,
Are we getting tricky on wording now at this point?
I mean, it just says to negotiate with residents, we're not holding them to a binding agreement. So as long as they engage in some sort of negotiations, I would hold that oath fulfilled.
And then I think what you said was fine.
Okay, yes.
Bottom of 6.
Do you guys, excuse me, do you guys already have a dollar amount? Yes. Okay, do we want that on the record? or-
Was there a second?
Okay.
Hang on. We haven't finished, he hasn't finished the whole motion.
Okay.
This motion to approve the subject final development plan amendment application is based on the following findings of fact and conclusions. Again, that the requested modifications do not fall under any impact to the PRD that would rise to the level of a major amendment. And is requested by the majority or the consensus of the residents within the subdivision.
Do I have a second? Second. Mr. Bishop will give you that one. Any discussion? Now you can ask the question.
What question did I ask?
Dollar amount.
Oh, yeah, there is a dollar amount that's already been satisfied with the residents, and that's on record with, the residents are happy with that?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Anything else? Mr. Schaefer?
Roll call, Mr. Bishop.
Yes.
Mr. Carter. Yes. Mr. Sears.
Yes.
Mr. Welch.
Yes,
Mr. Leff.
Yes. Motion passes.
now it's done.
Now you're done. The time is now 7:34. We'll call this case closed.
Do we want these photos in the record or no?
I will take them and add them since you reviewed them as part of your testimony.
All right, we're going to move on to the next thing. The Time is now 7:34. Let's see, CRI Out Parcels LLC requesting approval of a final development plan amendment to amend signage, parking, and related site configurations on approximately 1.37 acres located at 7447 State Route 3.
Hey, folks. Folks, please have your conversations out in the hallway. They're going to continue this meeting. We have other business on the agenda. Thank you.
Located at 7447 State Route 3, Westville, Ohio, 43082. A fueling center, convenience store, and car wash, currently zoned Planned Commercial District, PCD, also known as Turkey Hill. Zoning case number 2022-05. For those speaking on this case, please rise if you plan to speak. Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, to help you God? Do. Thank you. Be seated. Legal notice for this meeting was printed and published on September 1st, 2022 in the Delaware Gazette and posted at the Genoa Township Hall on August 17th, 2022. An attempt to mail notice of this hearing to property owners within 500 feet of the subject property was also made. The following are marked as Exhibits A through G. Exhibit A, legal notice. B, the affidavit of advertisement. C, the sign-in sheet. D, application and plans originally received August 15th, 2022. E, the staff technical review dated September 7th, 2022 for September 12th, 2022. F, staff memo dated September 7th, 2022 for the 12th meeting. And Exhibit G, all public comments received between August 15th, 2022 and September 12th, 2022. Mr. Schaefer, floor is yours.
Thank you, and Mr. Long, you're more than welcome to the table here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to read through my memorandum and go through the technical review comments, and then turn it back over to the chair, who will then probably turn it over to you for presentation. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As noted, CRI Out Parcels LLC is seeking to amend the final development plan for the Turkey Hill gas station at the address already read into the record, also known as lots 4556 and 4557 of Genoa Square. The amendment seeks to permit the following changes. 1, replacement of 2 vacuums serviced by 4 parking spaces with 6 vacuums serviced by 6 parking spaces. These improvements have already been constructed. Number 2, replacement and relocation of the existing air tower. This work is already complete. Number 3, revision of parking lot striping resulting in a new parking lot layout in the vicinity of the vacuums. This work has already been completed. The applicant has agreed to restripe the lot yet again to adhere to zoning requirements regarding the size of the angled parking spaces. Number 4, removal of an existing landscape island in the vicinity of the vacuums. This work has already been completed. And 5, various revisions related to the car wash, including directional sign, dryer timer, height bar, menu board, pay station, arrow pavement markings, and gate for the stacking route. Many, if not all, these items have been completed either temporarily or permanently as of this memo. The following changes to the site have been or will be made, but do not trigger the need for a final development plan amendment. That said, they have been documented in this application. They are 1, remodeling the interior of the existing car wash. This work was permitted through the Delaware County Department of Building Safety and is understood to be completed. Number 2, replacing the pavement in the vicinity of the vacuums. The following items do not appear to be changing with this proposal. That would be the site access, the stormwater management, landscaping, lot coverage, or building architecture. A little bit of history here on the development itself. Rezoning to the PD2, now known as Planned Commercial District, and plan approval for the subject track, along with the rest of Genoa Square, was granted on October 8th, 1997 as part of case PZC 97-08. A final development plan amendment was approved for Genoa Square, including Exxon fuel station with convenience store and car wash, Subway, and Goodwich Ice Cream, which are now all part of the site generally known today as Turkey Hill. On October 24th, 2001, that was case number PZC 2001-10. Zoning permits for the construction of the gas station related activities were issued in late 2001 and 2002, and I've noted all the permit numbers in the memo for the record. You can also see over the course between 2002 through 2013, various permits for signage on the site have been issued, and all the numbers are also incorporated within the memo for the record. Another final development plan amendment for this site was approved to allow for the installation of a hydraulic lift on November 9th, 2009. The subsequent zoning permit for the lift became void as it was never installed. History of this current proposal. I am going to spare us reading all of this. It is going to be entered into the official record as part of this memo. So essentially, staff sort of became aware as far back as September 2020 that there was possibly some changes being thought of in regards to specifically signage on the site. And then those conversations also reoccurred in July of 2021. They were very informal at that point. Earlier this year, those conversations became more serious, and we got some zoning applications for upgraded signage on the site. After taking some time to review them and discussing internally, we informed the applicant that they were probably going to have to apply for a final development plan amendment, and as such, we couldn't issue the permits. No amendment was filed after we communicated that to the individual who we were working with at that time. During that time, we also learned that the interior of the car wash would be completely renovated. We did determine that wasn't going to require a plan amendment because all the work was interior to the existing structure, so none of it triggered any changes as far as zoning was concerned. We were once again contacted by the individual who'd contacted us last summer, contacted us again regarding some temporary sign regulations in early June and sent us some PDFs containing design specifications for upgrading new signage on the site. By this point in time, staff started thinking that there was more going on this site other than just the interior car wash renovation and some new signage on the site, so we started paying a little bit more of attention to it and started investigating really what was going on. Basically, what we found out was, yes, there was more going on the site. Essentially, the vacuums, changing the pavements, changing revisions to the parking lot, and we took pictures and documented that. In communicating with one of the point people who was involved with the project at the time, it became clear that there was some sort of miscommunication, and they had come under the impression that because they had secured the approvals that they needed from the county, that they were good to go, not realizing or understanding that they needed to get the zoning approval secured for some of these items. We continue to engage conversations with the reps for the site, and that's a time Mr. Josh Long got brought on board, and he sort of became the point person, which was much appreciated by staff, because up to that point, we were talking to 2 or 3 different individuals, and that always makes me nervous when we're talking to multiple people, especially when they're from different firms, because they don't always seem to, the left hand and the right hand don't always seem to be coordinated. So Mr. Long met with us, and we were very grateful for that in June, and made it very clear that he was going to be the primary point person, and we were going to direct everything through him, which has really made the process a lot smoother since then, because I've been able to communicate directly with him and him with me, and we've been on the same page about everything really since that point. So we had a nice meeting with Mr. Long back in June about the sort of the situation, what had happened, what was going on the site, and what the path forward needed to be to get this all right with the house again, and get things moving forward. So at that point, staff reiterated the need to amend the final development plan. We answered questions related to signage and parking and expressed concerns about some of the conditions on the site, such as overgrown landscaping, junk accumulation, impermissible outdoor sales, area locations, non-permitted signage, the installation of the vacuums, changes to the parking area, which eliminated the aforementioned parking island, and decrease the number of parking spaces on site. We also expressed concerns that some of the engineering plans we had been given to better understand what was actually being done on the site didn't actually match the built conditions that we were seeing on the site. So after further investigation, Mr. Long agreed with that assessment and decided to agreed to work with us to make sure that we could get up-to-date corrected materials to look at. Staff also corresponded during this time with the Delaware County Department of Building Safety regarding what permits had and not been issued for the site, and I also had a question about ADA accessibility related to the outdoor sales area near the front door of the convenience store. Necessary electrical permits were ultimately secured from the county, and it was eventually determined that there was no ADA accessibility issue after the feedback I got from the county building officials. Zoning permits for the site were temporarily held on 2 different occasions, while those working on behalf of Turkey Hill addressed the various concerns that had been brought to their attention. Updated sign packages and site improvement details were provided to staff for review and feedback during this period as well in preparation for the making the application. During this timeframe, staff agreed to let recently completed and pending site improvements remain without potentially being cited in violation of the township zoning resolution, so long as the submission of a final development plan amendment addressing the items was imminent. Zoning permits for some temporary signage on the site was issued on July 5th, 2022. The applicant tried to submit this development plan amendment application in early July for the August meeting. However, there was a logistical hangup regarding getting a signature that they needed. So after that was caught, we had a discussion. The applicant agreed that they would just basically hold off on making the actual formal application and then just try again in August for the meeting this evening, which obviously they were successful. So I'm going to move back into the proposal now that I've given you a quick overview of the history of how we got here this evening. Regarding parking, the applicant states that the number of parking spaces proposed on site remains at 27, which was the number of spaces permitted via divergence granted under PZC case number 2001-10. This calculation, however, considers areas where vehicles utilizing the gas pumps are parked, which were not historically counted. Staff previously advised the applicant that these areas cannot be counted towards the site's parking requirements unless they met the design standards set forth in Article 19, such as dimensions, striping, the drive aisle widths, etc. The spaces in question, meaning the spaces adjacent to the gas pumps, appear to meet the length requirement for 90-degree parking spaces, but do not meet the 25-foot drive aisle width requirement, the 10-foot width requirement, or the requirement that spaces be clearly marked with paint or curb lines or curbstones. Also, you could also question, I guess, to some degree, is it really 90-degree angle parking or is it parallel parking? That's not in my memo, but just as you think about it, it all sort of, I guess, would depend on how you view where the front of that parking space is. Unless said evidence can be provided, a divergence to allow for fewer parking spaces than the required by code, as well as what was permitted under PZC 2001-10, or a redesign of the site to bring the site up to code, or again, at least to the standards set forth in the aforementioned case from 2001, will be required. In the alternative, a divergence to Section 1903 to essentially allow all 16 parking spaces to count towards the site's parking requirements could be pursued, since the individuals utilizing the convenience store or restaurant may stay parked at the pumps. So basically, in that latter scenario, if you were agreeable to that divergence, you essentially would be saying, we will allow you to, even though those parking spaces aren't marked and may not meet the dimensional requirements, we're basically going to waive all those requirements under 1903 and allow you to count them towards your site parking, because we do know that cars park there. And even though it's probably not the nicest thing to do to park there and go into the convenience store and take some time when someone else could be using that pump, we do know in all reality that's what people often tend to do. Absent of that, like I said, if you're not willing to go down that route and you're not comfortable granting a divergence for all the dimensional standards, then they would need a divergence to basically allow them to have the site be underparked. So those are sort of the three, I guess there's four routes. Three routes, each which end in divergence, or Route 4, which is that they revise the plan somehow to bring the plan up to code, or at least up to code as it was approved back in 2001. Also regarding parking, the length of the angled parking spaces on site down by the vacuums has been measured vertically, and that does not truly reflect the length of the area available for parking in said space. The length of said space should be measured at the same angle as the space itself and should not include any area, or at least not a substantive area, beyond any of the parking blocks that are in front of the spaces. So the spaces servicing the vacuum area have some parking blocks in front of them. You can see there's pavement beyond those parking lots. Obviously, the vehicles are going to overhang a little bit over that parking block, but I don't think they really should get credit for additional footage much further beyond those parking blocks, because that's really just dead space that no one actually can pull a vehicle into, unless I guess they park over top of the parking block. Sorry, I lost my spot here for a moment. If the space does not meet the 22-foot length requirement when measured in this manner, a divergence or revision to the plan will be needed. Regarding lighting, no new light fixtures are proposed on the site, or at least none that I'm aware of or saw on the plans. The new vacuums on site include some incidental lighting on them, if you've seen them. There are no applicable zoning regulations pertinent to said lighting. Signs on the site will be internally illuminated per the application materials. So signage really is the other big part of this, so that's what I'm going to dive into next. The following signage is proposed for the site. A 36.71 square foot wall sign on the northern face of the car wash building facing the pumps. A 36.71 square foot wall sign on the western face of the car wash building, which is the car wash entrance, which has historically had a sign on it. An unspecified size, safety message sign of an unspecified size on the new car wash clearance bar over the stacking area. The size of this sign needs to be clarified to determine if it falls below zoning permitting requirements. Once signage gets so small, we don't really even require them to pull a permit, and we just tell them that they can have it, but the specific measurements of that sign on that little clearance bar weren't provided. So while I suspect it falls below that threshold, I couldn't make that definitive determination based on the materials given to me. They're also proposing a 17.5 square foot freestanding menu board along the car wash stacking lane. Also a 3 square foot directional sign at the car wash exit, which falls below the permitting requirements that they would have been allowed to install regardless of whether or not this amendment was put forward in front of you or not. And then also a 29.6 square foot freestanding sign replacing the existing freestanding sign along State Street. Mr. Benson's doing a pretty good job of keeping up with what I'm reading here so you can visualize what we're talking about. Removal of the diamond logo above the channel letters on the convenience store and associated refurbishment of that area to clean it all up and make it look nice. And then also they're proposing removal of the diamond logo from the existing channel letters on the canopy, and that appears on 2 different sides of the canopy, and also associated refurbishment that would be necessary to clean all that up. The application needs to be revised to clarify whether the size of the new letters will match the size of the existing letters. If the new letters are larger, this could impact compliance. Below in the memo is a breakdown of the site signage comparing the original approved development plan, existing signage to what is proposed for the site, to what the current township regulations are for the site, and comparing all those to one another. Additional information is needed to complete the comparison. So it's a little difficult for me to try to read through this, but I'm going to do my best. So regarding freestanding signage on the site, currently the development plan has approved 25 square feet. The current signage on the site that was permitted is one sign which is 25 square foot in size, and another sign that's 18 square feet in size. So that adds up to 43 square feet covering 2 signs. How they were permitted to get that signage when the plan said 25, I'm not exactly sure. That's what is existing, and so I'm just sort of taking it is what it is at this point. What they're proposing, again, regarding freestanding signage is a 29.6 square foot ground sign, which includes the electronic message center portion, a 17.5 square foot pole sign, a 3 square foot pole sign, which is the directional sign that's exempt from really permitting requirements that they'd be allowed to do anyway even if this proposal wasn't coming through. And then a post and panel sign that might possibly be exempt, but the square footage of it is unknown. And again, that's just the small signage on the clearance bar here that Mr. Benson has pulled up on the screen. So the current zoning resolution for this site would allow 25 square feet of freestanding signage over one sign. So as you can see, what they're proposing exceeds both the current development plan, exceeds what is currently on the site by about 4.1 square feet, and also exceeds what the zoning resolution currently would allow for them, both in square footage and in terms of the number of signs for freestanding signs. So that's the breakdown of freestanding signs. Regarding the building mounted signage, the current development plan had permitted up to 168 square feet of building mounted signage. According to township records, the existing amount of building mounted signage on site is 154 square feet over 7 different signs. The applicant is currently proposing a total of 131.5 square foot of building mounted signage over 7 signs. So actually below what the original development plan and what is approved and below what is currently on the site. However, that is above the 65.6275 square foot that the current zoning resolution would permit them to have. And the current zoning resolution would only permit 2 signs, whereas they currently have 7. So in this respect, because they're keeping the same number of signs and keeping the square footage below what they were previously permitted, I don't think they necessarily need a divergence regarding this aspect of signage, because it's just reorganizing the signage. They're actually reducing the amount of square footage that they're going to propose for the site as far as building mounted signage goes, and the number of signs is remaining the same. So we can't claw back stuff that they've already been granted. They've been granted up to 168, and we've already permitted 7 signs. So to me, they could go up to 168 over 7 signs.
A question real quick.
Yes, sir.
Were there 7 signs in the original
That's what
submission?
my question was.
Or was it just the total amount of square footage?
I would have to go back and pull, because this one got very complicated, and I can tell even they were having trouble keeping track of the signage over the years, because there's a lot of notes and handwritten notes about that specific item. So I don't have that information exactly in front of me. Mr. Benson might be able to either answer that question, because he was doing some research on this as well, or maybe you can pull the book.
Yeah, I believe there were 7 signs when they originally did it. There was also, now, there's also 2 signs that aren't in this they're in this package that are existing, that they're gonna continue to have. Those are the 2 Subway signs that are on the convenience store. Those are all included in those numbers. There was also a ice cream store sign that was on the convenience store at one point. That got removed, and when that got removed, they added a sign onto the car wash that was another menu board type advertising sign. I believe that is going away. So that's no longer proposed. So it's still going to be the same amount of signs as there were before with 7 signs.
Okay, but in the original submission and the divergence review, there were 7 signs.
Yes.
That fit into this protocol.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't think we have an issue with the number of signs regarding the building mounted signage.
thank you.
So really, as you can see, the non-compliance regarding signage has more to do with the freestanding signage as opposed to the building mounted signage. And then I have the totals there for you, but I think it's there for you to read, and then if you have any questions, because I think I've confused a lot of people already trying to read through this table. So the following pieces of information are needed by staff in the submission package to complete the review of the site signage completely and accurately. Number 1, the exact size of the message on the clearance bar, as I already noted. And number 2, the dimensions and size of the 2 existing Subway signs Mr. Benson noted, as well as the convenience store channel letters. I'm going to note that the permitted sizes, according to township records, are reflected in the table above. So the numbers I gave you are based on the permits we issued. But obviously, we never were able to verify if what was installed. I'm assuming what got installed matched the permits, or at least I'd like to think that's the case. But the applicant needs to, regardless, incorporate those numbers into their material so they're accounted for as we review the site signage moving forward. We also need to know the exact cumulative size of the digital portion of the ground sign that's proposed, the one with the prices on it. Per the above breakdown in the table, divergences are needed to the following. The total square footage and number of freestanding signs. And you can actually strike number 2, because I realized that that actually probably doesn't need a divergence as I was reading through that, because as we alluded to, the number of signs isn't changing and the square footage that they're proposing is below what they already allowed in the existing development plans. So again, under current code, it wouldn't meet standard, but they've already been granted that number of signs and that square footage under the development plan, so I think the township is going to be obligated to honor that. Also, additional divergences could be required pending any plan revisions or additional information that is provided. Regarding the ground sign, since we haven't talked about it a lot, the location and height of it is really not changing. As such, the applicant would not be subject to the review, nor are they required to be brought into compliance if they are legally non-conforming, if any existing standards are legally non-conforming. So Mr. Benson has it pulled up right there. So you can see the brick portion is remaining as is. And so really all that's being swapped out is are the panel sections that say Turkey Hill and have the prices on them.
Does the digital aspect of it change anything with the sign code?
Yeah, so in my opinion, those qualify as electronic message centers. So basically, they're allowed to do that because it's an existing changeable copy sign. And we do say that changeable copy can go to an EMC. And we also say that as long as no more than 50% of that sign isn't taken up by the EMC, that they would essentially be permitted. There's also some other operable standards that the EMCs have to follow. I don't think that they're probably going to have problems adhering to those standards, because really when we wrote those standards, we were envisioning more of the EMC signs that have like the video displays or like the moving graphics. These numbers are going to be pretty static and are only probably ever going to change when the prices change. So it's not like they're going to be rotating or changing on every 10 seconds or minute or so like you would see on some other types of EMCs that we see. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my place one more time. The site would likely qualify for some signage bonuses, but none are being claimed in the current application. If the applicant wishes to utilize these bonuses, it should be documented and evidence of the qualification should be provided. As far as staff can tell, the following bonuses probably apply, but again, sufficient evidence needs to be provided. Number one, a 10% increase for the width of the adjacent right-of-way, which is State Route 3, aka State Street. A 5% increase for the speed limit of the adjacent right-of-way, which is again State Street, and a 5% increase for the height of the buildings on the site. Whether the site qualifies for bonuses due to the square footage of building facades cannot be determined based on the information provided, because I don't know what the square footage of those facades are. They have incorporated one divergence request into the application already, and that is specifically to section 1903.01 regarding the minimum 25-foot width requirement for parking drive aisle servicing parking spaces at 90-degree angles. They're proposing to allow for a parking drive aisle to be reduced from 25 feet to 23 feet. The justification being that due to the geometry of the site on the south side of the building, there's a single point between the parking stalls that is only 23.7 feet in width away from the parking stalls across the way, and Mr. Benson's going to scroll back up and point out where on the site we're talking about. So right there, they have it cluttered. So right there, because of the geometry of the site and the parking spaces, it pinches down because of that little, what used to be a landscape island there. Obviously, as you continue to go either direction, it widens back out to 25 feet, but just by the nature of the design, that specific area is below the 25-foot threshold.
So, quick question.
Yes, sir.
What was the minimum amount of parking spaces required?
Under the development plan that was approved, 27.
Okay. But you're including, are we including the?
Yes, all of those,
tires,
yes.
the
The
spots
parking
for
for the vacuums.
the vacuums, and you're including the?
The 27 originally did not include any of the spaces adjacent to the pumps.
For the pumps. But you're including the vacuums too as part of the parking spaces, which probably will not be used as parking spaces.
No, I think they tend to be. And that's historically, they were counted that way too, even when the old vacuums were there. So I do think we have to give credit to them regarding parking spaces for those spaces, because that's historically how they've been counted.
Okay.
So they're, again, I think I already mentioned the justification that basically it's a pinch point, and that's what's creating the non-compliance. Staff note for clarification, yeah, the site was originally required 29, and then when this original development plan was approved, they were allowed to go down to 27. And actually, I think the commission at the time asked them to remove a space or two, because I think the original design was a little tight in one area. I think it was towards the drive aisle, Paul, is that? Okay. I think there was an issue with how the original design with 29 spaces was designed, where the commission at the time actually thought it created some awkwardness and a tightness. So they actually, I think, asked the applicant at the time to drop a couple spaces to ease that up. So that divergence down to 27 is partially, I think, was at request of the township zoning commission at the time. So 27 is the required number on site per the development plan. But obviously now, if they can't count the gas station spaces, they'd be having to ask to further reduce that. Staff's technical review is attached. My review is limited to only those items being revised directly impacted by the related revisions. Existing elements on the site which are not changing have been reviewed and do not need to be brought up to code. Staff is considering the vacuums, proposed air tower, pay station, and clearance bar pole accessory structures since they are permanently affixed to the ground. And some of those items listed are mechanical in nature. Mechanical devices are alluded to as being accessory structures in per section 1609.02.b of the zoning resolution. That said, such improvements do appear to be in compliant with the code. While the current resolution stipulates that accessory structures are not permitted in front yards, which in this instance would be State Street, these structures were previously approved in this location, so I don't think there's a compliance issue with the vacuums being swapped out. There was already vacuums there in that front yard. They're just putting in new style vacuums and have increased the number of vacuums in that front yard, but the fact that they're that close to the road is a fact that it was already pre-existing this proposal. Staff also does not believe that the increase in the number of vacuums nor the shuffling of the locations, as I just alluded to, invalidates the previously authorized layout. When the sign regulations were overhauled a few years ago, it was acknowledged that divergences would likely be necessary for sites such as this, which typically contain numerous signs. The content-neutral manner in which local governments must regulate signs makes it very difficult, if not impossible these days, to write a code that can anticipate so many unknown variables on a site such as this. Back in the day, we could call them gas station signs and price signs, and we could classify them based on their content, but we can't classify them that way anymore. So when we had to overhaul the code a few years ago, it made regulating sites that we know are going to have a lot of signage on them, like shopping centers and gas stations, difficult. And I'm pretty sure the commission at the time even stated on the record that they knew by adopting those updated revisions to the code that we probably were going to see more signage divergences on commercial sites in particular as a result of it. As I noted, the digital portions of the ground sign qualify as an electronic message center sign. They appear to comply with the township's EMC regulations. However, additional information regarding the dimensions of them are needed to verify that. Staff doesn't consider the pavement markings, such as the arrows depicted on the plans, to be subject to township sign regulations. We've never really gotten into the business of regulating pavement markings in parking lots. If additional divergences are being requested, Section F of the development text will need to be updated accordingly. Divergences related to parking and/or lighting will similarly need to be reflected in the text in sections B and D respectively, if they're being asked for. While not required by code, staff does not support the removal of the landscape island. Generally speaking, said island helped to control traffic flow, protect the parked vehicles, reduce the amount of impervious surface on the site, and provided an area, although a small one, admittedly, for snow to be piled up. Pavement striping, in my opinion, does not generally achieve any of those objectives, especially in winter when you really can't see the painting on the pavement. The second wall sign on the car wash facing the gas pumps, also in my assessment, doesn't really seem to be necessary. Removing it from the proposal may reduce the impact of any related divergence requests, although now that we've determined that the building mounted signage probably doesn't require divergence, I don't feel nearly as strongly about that. That said, signage in this area was initially shown as being proposed back in 2001, but records do indicate that said signage was removed and not incorporated as part of the final approval. The applicant has provided the review to the township regarding the major minor amendment standards under section 271003, and they believe as follows, and I'm just summarizing here. Number one, the use of the site will remain unchanged, i.e. gas station, convenience store, and car wash. Staff agrees with this assessment. Number two, that the exterior structures are to remain and any modifications to the building will be interior, hence no significant increase in overall structures. Staff agrees with this assessment. Three, there will be no increase in density. Staff agrees with this assessment as it is not applicable. Four, that site circulation will remain unchanged and that the spirit of the original layout is met, modifications being minor in nature to serve the replaced vacuums and air stations. Staff agrees with this assessment. Number five, there's no significant change to open space. Staff agrees with this assessment. Six, the site is providing 27 code compliant parking spaces, thus not reducing the number of off-street parking or loading spaces. Staff does not agree with this assessment as currently presented in the materials, and that's again due to the fact that the code as written right now doesn't really anticipate or allow for those areas adjacent to the gas pumps to be counted as parking spaces. So in order for those areas to be counted towards that 27, we're gonna have to do some sort of divergence, or we're gonna have to further diverge the amount of parking required for the site. Number 7, regarding pavement widths, a minor divergence to the parking drive aisle width is requested. Said divergence doesn't result in the reduction in the width of the pavement per the applicant, but rather just a change in how the existing pavement is delineated for utilization, i.e. parking versus driving. Staff agrees with the spirit of the applicant's assessment of this matter. In number 8, there will be no reduction in the acreage of the planned development. Staff agrees with that assessment. As of the date of this memorandum, no complaints have been filed with the township regarding any of the improvements or changes to the site. Really, they're before this evening because staff is the one who noticed this was going on and brought it to their attention. So no one called into our office and started questioning, hey, what's going on at Turkey Hill? This was purely staff observing some changes and following up on concerns that we had. And should the subject application be approved, applicable zoning permits will need to be obtained and approved by the Development and Zoning Office. So moving on to the tech review, which essentially just, more formally recaps the issues I've already brought to your attention. The comments basically being related to documenting the divergence that's been requested. The fact that as currently proposed, if we don't count the spaces adjacent to the gas pumps, it leaves the site 4 parking spaces further below what was required by code, or what was allowed per the development plan. So they originally were required 29. They were approved at 27 for the development plan. If we don't count the gas pumps, we are now down to, that'd be 23. So in essence, we're going from 29 to 23 if we don't include the parking by the gas pumps. Or 27 to 23 if you compare the development plan to the current proposal under that scenario. We've already talked about they need to revise the measurements of the angled parking spaces to demonstrate that they are meeting code in those respects. I've already talked about some of the missing dimensions from the signage, so I don't need to rehash any of that. We already talked about that there's information missing from the applicable to the EMC requirements. I am asking for a lighting plan being provided so they can demonstrate that all lighting is compliant with, lighting for the signage that is compliant with section 1802.05.g of the zoning resolution. And I also am asking them to revise the application to acknowledge and agree to the EMC operational standards set forth in section 1804.10, including all subsections. So I know that's a lot to throw at you, especially whenever we start reviewing signage. It gets real technical and complicated real quick often on these sites. So I'm sure the commission's going to have questions, but at this point, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jill. Can you turn your mic on for me? Your name and your address and.
Josh Long, CSO, 466 Randall Road, Delaware, Ohio. So I'm here representing the applicant, which is EG America, owner of the Turkey Hill brand of the existing site there. And so the scope of this job is, they're going through a lot of their car washes around town, interior remodel of the car wash, and just doing general upkeep, maintenance, minor additions to the site. For this particular site, a vacuum upgrade and signage were the other things, within their scope for this site. And the starting construction early was an error. It was an oversight of, they got, permits were received for the building, permits should have been received for the site adjustments, and they shouldn't have gone to construction. That's an error. And as the applicant, we admit to that. But overall, what we're here to do is understand your concerns, work through a lot of the items Mr. Schaefer just went through. I think he did a very thorough job of going through where we're at with this site and kind of what the difficulties are. It's an existing site. The reason for the layout changing, the reason for the parking being minimized is that those vacuum spaces that are going in today are bigger than the ones that were previously there. So the previous vacuum is an older layout with a standard parking space, where these are kind of the layout where the vacuum sits between the cars, and you would want that space to be able to walk between the two cars without creating conflict. So if you're parked there, you don't want to hit the car next to you. So those spots are now wider, so less parking spaces can fit in that south side. So then, the spirit of trying to count the pump spots is obviously gonna be a discussion point tonight, and we'll dive into that. The reason we counted the 4 spots on the outside was, the mindset was those are parallel parking spots. That's why we used the 9, so those squares are 9 by 23, which is code compliant for parallel, and then a parking aisle would be 12 foot. Kind of a gray area, because I'm assuming that's a one-way measurement, so we can dive into that, but that was kind of the mindset between using the outside 4 as to all of them, because the interior ones, 2 cars parked, there's no drive aisle. And then obviously we're seeking the drive width divergence, and but I'm mainly here to answer questions, receive feedback, and kind of work together on our next steps here. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Is there anything specific to the staff memo that Joe presented that you've talked internally about, that you're moving forward with, that you have further questions on? There's a lot there.
There's a lot there.
Okay.
Signage, all the questions regarding providing more information, we're happy to do that,
Okay.
and we'll plan to do that. I don't see any of that information being a problem. I think a lot of it we're gonna find is code compliant, especially with the existing sign size and all of that. And one of the changes they did make to meet code was in their ideal world, they would have 2 of the EMC signs, one on the physical car wash, and then having the sign count, they did go down to 1 in an effort to meet code. I know that the goal was to meet code as much as possible. I know they made a couple signs on the car wash smaller than their standard, and a couple concessions there. So I think when we go through those signage questions, we'll find that the signs do fit in the code. I mean, the big one I want to discuss is how we measure parking and how we count parking. Because we have a lot of existing constraints out here, and really what it comes down to is the allocation of the striping, not necessarily the pavement width, and how we want to rule that, and what we want to call divergence versus what we want to call, something we can discuss here.
All right, well, let's talk parking.
Let's do it.
Spaces 23 through 27, did you look at angling those to try to reduce the aisle width and move 7 through 10?
So the problem with angled parking, and yeah, it reduces the aisle width, but it increases how far we have to, I mean, if we were to make that 60-degree angled parking, I think we'll have to, based on the description that I'm learning of how we measure angled parkings, that's gonna have to be a 25-foot offset from that curb now, because it's measured from the usable parking space. So
25-foot offset from which curb? If we're looking at 23 through 27, and you go to a smaller angle, or just an angle,
yep,
you have a dead corner sitting there between 21 and 22. So you increased a little bit of the overall width, but you angle it, which then reduces the width between 22 and 7 for an aisle width. Have you looked at any of that to angle to see what it does?
We can look into that.
Okay, what about the spaces you got next to 13 and 14? You've got a drive aisle that's 23 and a half wide, and we would be looking at potentially parallel on that drive aisle.
I think we would lose our ability to have two-way traffic over there if a car was parked, so we'd have to make that a one-way lane.
Do you need two-way traffic there? You've got 2 entries in and out off the main aisleway that go into the site.
Excuse me, Dad, I think this picture, I drove through there today.
There are people that park there all the time.
Right, exactly.
It's-
I don't
I've
think
always
they're-
seen people
Are
park
they
there.
painted as a parking spot
No,
or
they're not.
counted?
No.
And
they're
it
not.
really, I was wondering if you count them, or either that or say don't park there, because people always park there. And it's tight in there, but it's.
Yeah, I mean,
Do they require
two-way? Is that what they're saying, is that code requires a two-way in order to?
I don't think there's anything in the code requiring that. I think it just becomes more of a,
You can put directional
What-
on there.
yeah, what makes sense in terms of, you know, we don't want to, I don't want to create any oddities to satisfy a parking requirement that might induce more confusion, ultimately induce more confusion on the site.
Justification, I'm not counting the center because you can't have two-way, correct?
I think they just didn't count those because they were just needing to pick up 4 spaces. So I do want to say that I do believe Mr. Long is correct in regarding if we do consider those pump spaces, parallel parking spaces, the width is 9 feet, that is the code requirement. The length is, the code requirement is 23, and the parking aisle width is 12 feet, which I also agree with this assessment that a 12-foot parking aisle width would probably be an assumption that it would be at minimum one-way traffic. Doesn't mean it has to be one-way traffic.
Right.
But 12 feet is definitely obviously not wide enough for two-way traffic. I'll also say, though, when these dimensions were laid out, I don't think it was anticipating some of the scenarios we are seeing on this site. I think with parallel parking, it was thinking of more traditional parallel parking designs that you see. Also with the angled parking, I'm not sure it really anticipated the angled parking that we even see on this site. I think it was anticipating more when you go into those grocery stores and they have fields of parking and that they angle those spaces and all those angles are offset and they have one-way flow up and down those aisles. I think that was probably the design that the code was more thinking of as opposed to something like this. So this is a little bit tricky, admittedly, to try to.
When you do angle, you're thinking of it a V, and you have a single aisle once you have an angle parking. So you're doing directional flow of traffic at that point.
Yeah, so I guess at the
Not
risk of
opposed.
trying to persuade the commission, I guess maybe the big picture you want to ask yourselves is, are you just okay with this site essentially having
My
a
concern.
few less spaces?
How full is the parking?
Yeah, I think it gets pretty full, right? I mean, judging by the subway, now you got the car wash, and then you got the gas station itself, plus the convenience store. I mean, you know, I've been in there when every spot is taken.
I've only been a handful of times, and I parked freely up by the building. We talked to the store manager today, which is only worth as much as we want it to be worth, and she stated that it's typically not a full parking lot. Obviously, parking codes met or intended to meet, you know, peaks, so I get that. I think you also gotta consider we're not counting a ton of spots that people use as spots. I mean, most people do not move their car after getting gas. They go in and get what they need to get and leave. But I think it's a functioning site today, and I think this layout will definitely continue to function well. And I think there's some existing constraints here with the shape of the site. And
I think another concern, though, is we started at 29, and now we're basically going down to 23 if we don't count the spots at.
And I counted that correctly. Did I do that
you
math
did that,
correctly?
you did that
Okay.
correct. And understood your concern.
Anecdotally from staff's,
Number of parking spots, it's just we're not calling some of them parking.
Yeah, well, assuming you count the 4 that are part of the gas station.
Right, but we did before, right? Is that the-
No.
never counted the gas,
Oh,
the
we're
spaces
not.
by the gas station. Yeah,
Ah,
so.
Okay, there you go, okay,
Yeah.
right.
The main difference is, since the vacuum spaces that are there now are larger, there used to be more spaces down there, now there's less. Like, you know, it's obviously a similar, we didn't change the pavement out there.
You lost one. You went from 7 to 6 down there.
Yeah, and then,
But that's not marked on the angle, by the way. Those bottom 6, I don't see an angle to measure that against. Is that, are those supposed to be a 45 parking spot?
Sure, yeah, no, absolutely.
For Joe's, when we're comparing the parking standards, I just want to make sure, it's more than, it looks like
it's a 45.
It looks like a 45.
It's a 45.
All right.
And anecdotally, it is a busy site. I think the section by the gas pumps and the convenience store, at least in my casual observation, seemed to function fairly well. I think my biggest concern is this area where they were changing some of the parking only because I think when the peak meal times at lunch and dinner, Subway tends to generate a lot of parking. I'm not really so much concerned about the parking for the convenience store and the gas pumps and the car wash. I think it's really the Subway is my concern here.
I get gas there all the time, I really don't have a problem with the traffic. It does get busy in there. Is the new vacuuming thing, is that gonna be like Moo Moo's? Is that gonna be free if you get a car wash? So will that encourage people to go over there, or do you have to pay separately? Small thing, I'm just curious. Because if it's free, more people will use it and there's more traffic. I'm
Sure.
just curious.
I can review the payment process for this site, but I'm not certain.
So my point is, I do get gas there, it's not a problem. I mean, sometimes you get somebody coming in, somebody going out, but everybody's courteous and lets them.
Yeah.
There's-
There is a sign, according to the sign I took a picture of this afternoon when I got my dinner at Subway. There is a sign that has the Auto Spa Car Wash logo, and then it says free vacuums. It's like a temporary sign at the end of one of the parking spaces. So I don't know if that means free vacuums with your car wash, or if that just means free vacuums and this site just happens to be associated with the car wash.
I bet you have to back.
Do you know the,
But I'm just saying, you know, I looked at backing into that spot and it's tight in there, but if it meets code, I don't know. Between the vacuums and the parking right behind it.
It's, yeah, I mean, it's one-way traffic, so it's tighter than a two-way lane.
what you've got marked as 13, which is underneath the pump, at the pump, and 16, which is in front of the convenience store. What is that? There's nothing on here that tells me the space of what you're counting as that aisle.
it's,
Which,
Between 13 and 16?
the drive width?
Yeah, that, what is that? It's not marked on the drawing.
Yeah, it would be maintaining the existing, so I would have to check that.
Well, I know, but if we're gonna call 13 a parking space,
Understood.
we don't know what that is and doesn't meet the requirement.
That's the area that I always have trouble with, is that end of the site, because I'm usually coming in from either the Home Depot side of the lot or the Kroger side of the lot or what have you, and, or I'm at the, what is that, Romeo's Pizza Shop, and running over to grab something from the Stop and Rob, and
Your car is also 25 feet long, so.
well, that's true, but when I've had an issue, that's where I've had an issue, is there on that end of the property.
Yep. Again, I think my concern is, you know, we're trying to create some spots here. We're getting more traffic now. I think that's the goal here, is to get more traffic in to the store and to the car wash. And we're still down. We wanted 29 initial with the development plan. We went to 20, allowed 27, and now we're going down to 23, but we're trying to create for that we're already there to start with.
And I guess I get your point. From a philosophical standpoint, I don't know that I want to create more spaces, because everything is so shoehorned on that site that, I mean, from an economic standpoint, I don't know what the applicant's position is, but I don't know that I would necessarily want to entice more people to park there.
I guess the concern too is, are we setting a precedent?
Well,
Either that or people are gonna park at the pumps and not use the gas and go to the convenience store.
right.
So it's just chewing up gas slots.
And some of that comes down to, I guess, does the commission feel like it's fair to count those spaces? I mean, obviously, people are parking at those pumps, even though they're not, official parking spaces per se. I mean, they're utilizing that manner.
I have an issue counting, personally, I'll have an issue counting them if we're not gonna mark them.
What was that, Dave?
I'm gonna have an issue counting them if we're not gonna mark them.
Okay.
Because then we're gonna open up to other things down the road of not marking parking spots and counting them as parking spots.
And that's-
My personal belief,
that's
if I'm gonna follow what we've got in this thing, it's gotta be, they've gotta be marked if they're gonna be parking spots.
Where did the
You
20
four get to make another decision.
That's to my point, exactly. I mean, are we setting a precedent here that we can start doing this with?
I'm sorry,
creating
Mr. Carr, I think
spots?
you were gonna have a
The
question.
29, is that based on acreage?
So 1904 has a bunch of different uses listed in the code and tells you how the parking is to be.
Because I'm with Chip on that, we don't want to shoehorn more people in there if it's really not room, and is 29 somewhat of an arbitrary situation, and if, I mean, is there a problem with going down, I don't understand, what's the,
What did we call that under retail? store?
My guess it was retail and possibly restaurant because of the subway, because there's no specific parking standard, at least I'm not seeing one in the code that calls out like auto fueling stations, so.
So if it's retail, it's one for every 150 square feet of floor area and one for every 2 employees. Versus restaurant of one for every 3-person capacity and one for each employee. Be restaurant.
Now, in fairness to the applicant, I mean, if their original development plan was approved at 27, I don't know that we can hold them to 29.
No, I think, but they're asking to go to 21, right? 23, sorry, 4 less.
Right. So I mean, but we keep saying 29. I mean,
It's 27.
regardless, it's going to be 4 less of where it's at now.
It was approved originally at 27.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what it's approved on the basis of, and your point was that where we're gonna get another parking spot in there, and what are we gonna do if they can't find one, make them take the vacuums out and put park spots over there? I don't know.
So Chairman left, I'm going to bring in front of you this is the original development plan we have. You can see here's a table. You want me to just read that off to everyone?
Yeah, just good.
I'll go ahead and just read this off so we can all understand how they came up with the 29 standard. So retail square footage, they have listed at 2,100 square feet. At 1 space per each 150 square feet, that equals 14 spaces. They said they were gonna have 2 retail employees for 1 space for 2 employees is 1, so 14 plus 1, we're up to 15. They said there was gonna be 2 car wash employees, so per the aforementioned standard, that adds another space, so that got them to 16. And then there were 30 restaurant seats, so at 1 space per 3 seats, that's 10 spaces. And then 3 restaurant employees, so 1 space per 1 employee for restaurants was 3 spaces. When you add all of that up together, that's how they got to the 29. And I'm fairly certain the standards on parking have not changed. Yeah, retail stores, 1 for 150 square feet of floor area plus 1 per every 2 employees. And then for restaurants, 1 for every 3 persons capacity plus 1 for each employee. So that's how they came up with the standards.
So Josh, are they counting the employees actively parking in those spots? Or are they expected to park somewhere else?
I do not know exactly where they're parking, but it's anticipated to be on site or they would take public transit.
Are there still the same amount of tables in the subway?
I can't confirm that there's the same as when they submitted that. That's, I would
So we're-
assume the breakdown of restaurant to retail did not change just because of, you know, there would have had to been a building permit to change most of those facilities, depending on what, if they changed the kitchen area, and that would all have to probably be the same. But this, I mean, it's 3-4 ownerships change.
Well, if there's less seating,
Exactly.
then we go through that calculation again, and now your number goes down. So
Sure.
it'd be good to go through that process again to see what the theoretical number is supposed to be.
Plus, are there any employees for the car wash now?
Is it, is it just automated?
It's automated.
So
There's
you
no
lose-
employees at all?
Well, there is an employee sitting
One
there.
on the exit, I guess.
Yeah, well, I have seen one sitting there.
They usually have 1. I've never seen 2 there
that-
at the same time.
Is that temporary to make sure the system is working correctly, or is that a
To make sure you
full-time,
get on
is
the
that a
rail.
position?
You get in the rails.
Okay, so you're looking at 1904 in our code, and specifically is gonna be.
It's 0.19 is restaurants.
So 0.19 and 0.20. Look at those two. And let's see where you are from a square footage total, a seating capacity total. Because maybe this is a moot point. At this point, you might be fine on the number of spots if you're not allowing that much seating and that many employees.
And just so I'm clear too, Joe, there was a divergence for the 27.
Yes, to go from 29 to 27.
Okay,
Now, I'm looking at the zoning commission minutes from 2001, and as part of their motion, they did basically direct the applicant at the time to remove some parking spaces. Because I think to Mr. Welch's point, there was concerns about traffic flow on the site, and I think Mr. Carter alluded to that too, of, there's certainly a push-pull factor here. I mean, you only have a finite amount of space.
All right. So did we be parking to the death at this point? Good. Move on to signs. Does anybody have any other comments on parking or site? All right. From 25 square feet on a freestanding sign to 43, it's pretty significant. If we take the bonuses potentially into account, and Joe, maybe I did my calculation wrong, but we go from 25 to 30 potential. Does that, without doing an official calculation, sound somewhat right?
25, so they're essentially,
They get a
if they
20%.
qualify all those bonuses, yeah, they would be up to 20%.
bonus. So it gets them to
So that'd be
30.
what, 5 extra square feet, yeah.
Okay. But if we look at the total amount of square foot, they're gonna be below what the approved development plan was by your chart. Right? So we have the approved development plan. of
Correct.
193 total. They're currently at 197. The proposed is to go down to 178.6. Not including whatever's on that potential exempt one for the clearance.
Yeah, which I don't think is gonna add up to,
Which is
bringing
not
them up
gonna-
to 197.
No, not that one. The clearance bar.
Little
which is-
clearance bar.
It's a 4-inch,
Signage.
4-inch bar, but it doesn't have the length of the
It's
signage.
definitely no taller than 7 inches. It's just really the question was, what is this width? I mean,
Square
it's-
footage.
Yeah, it's probably a square foot of that.
They're
so-
still under, even with not having the one that's there now, but adding that one, they're still under?
Yeah, because some of what you're seeing is there was actually some signage that's been removed. So in some aspects, they're actually, because the little diamond logos are going away, there was some additional signage above like the car wash sign that got taken down. Some of the old branding came down. So the code doesn't necessarily have a max signage provision for the entire site. I just added up those totals just to give you another point of reference. So you could view it as, well, yeah, they technically may need divergence regarding the freestanding signage, but you also know as far as the overall site signage, it's actually improving over originally what had been approved because there's actually, over the years, been signage removed from the site.
So my question is, you've got 2 signs labeled as freestanding signs, and we've got a picture of this thing,
Yep,
which is the pricing model. We then have a double-sided do not enter and thank you sign,
yep.
and this one. Isn't that 3 freestanding signs?
The fourth one is the little clearance bar sign.
That doesn't count? It's under the, it's in the.
That would be, yes, if that was the only, if they emailed me today and said, Joe, we want to put this do not enter sign in, I'd say absolutely go ahead. You don't need to amend your development plan. It's under the height and square footage threshold for signage under the zoning code.
Even though it's double-sided?
Yeah, we only count the square
of the one
footage
side.
per side because
side.
it's, you're only viewing one side at a time with that type of sign, so that's the theory. If it was like one of those angle signs where you could see both those
Yeah,
sides
yeah,
at the
yeah.
same time, it'd be different. But we would basically tell them, yeah, the code, this is one of those types of signs that the code says is allowed basically everywhere. And this is the exact reason why we wrote the code the way we did, because we knew when we were gonna have fast food type of places or gas station kind of places come in, that they were gonna wanna have directional signs, but we also know we can't call them directional signs anymore, thanks to that Supreme Court case. So I basically researched how big are those type of signs usually, and that's why I wrote the exception the way I did. So that way we knew we wouldn't get bogged down with having to debate entrance and exit signs for these types of developments.
So then we're just worried about the message board and the pricing board.
Those are, yeah, the two that are really of primary concern. And it's those, when you add them together, still put them above the threshold.
Right.
But if you zoom out and look at what was permitted for the site, somehow they got permitted 43 square feet of signage. So if you compare to what they actually were permitted to what they're proposing, they're really only 4.1 square feet, give or take the clearance bar sign, above what they've already had permitted on the site. I see a look of confusion, so I'll try to restate that.
Hang on a second. It says development plan, what was approved and what they have on site.
The
So they're
development,
exceeding.
the approved development plan documentation says 25 square feet.
Yes.
Somehow or another, over time, they were issued permits that total, for two signs, that equal 43 square feet. So,
Okay, so permits actually exist to get them to 43.
yeah, I believe so. At least that's what that's the current signage that they have on site. We need to- And that's where it gets really tricky with this particular application. And there's notes actually are computing all the signage, one dated from 2001, and there's another breakdown of all of it from 2013. So this is not the first time someone has had to really dig into this signage issue for the site. It's also important to remember that the way we classified signs used to be radically different.
Yes.
So that 43 square feet, that may have totally been permissible and per the plan, the way we used to define signage. I'm reviewing that signage based on how we define it now, not on how we used to define it. So it's entirely possible that the permits that were issued may be completely inconsistent, may be completely consistent with the development plan. I didn't go back and do all that research, because as far as I'm concerned, the signs were permitted, they were built. At some point, it's water under the bridge, and how much do you want to go back and try to reanalyze stuff that happened over 10 years ago? So I guess that's an important distinction. What we have listed as current signage is viewing that signage as we would view it today, not how the code viewed it back in 2013, if that makes any sense. So it's a little bit apples and oranges, I guess, to some degree, as regard as the code is concerned, because it was so radically changed.
Was there a differentiation between freestanding and building mount back then, or was it a total square footage?
I'd have to go back and pull the book and see
I don't
exactly
remember.
how it all got broken down. I know when they looked at the signage, they broke it down by the monument sign, the gas station canopy, the car wash, and the mini mart. But I'd have to look at each permit to see if they documented how they were classifying each one of those signs.
So for all intents and purposes, we're talking about 4 square feet of signage.
Permit was granted for 43 total square feet, and they want to go up in 4 square feet. Yes, we're talking about 4 now, not 20.
Approximately, because we don't know the square footage of that little clearance spot. Yeah, rough, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5, maybe 4 to 6. Again, with the acknowledgement that the overall site signage appears to actually be going down from historically what's been there.
Comments, questions, other?
Do we have enough to issue divergences or approve divergences tonight?
My personal opinion is no. I would like to see a calculation done on the bonus percentages, and if there's anything else that can be done with the parking spaces, because they might not even need a divergence at this point based on however their operation is set up. And I don't think you're capable of saying that tonight. You need to go back and do some work, yes?
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
I think tabling is something we,
Don't say that word. Continuing.
sorry. No, I think there's some additional information that we need to provide and have a complete list of divergences potentially for the site, or have them better defined at minimum. So we recognize that.
I agree. I would like, for you two to come up with a recommendation with all that information real succinctly, so we'll have something we can actually, vote on. I appreciate all the background and all that, but at this point, I don't think we could put together divergences.
Jeff, you got anything? Anybody?
That was kind of the point of my question.
That
is-
was,
Yeah, I agree. We don't have enough. Right.
are you comfortable going forward? Do you need to,
Yes, can I ask,
yeah.
just some
ask away.
clarifying questions for, just so I can take as much information back as possible. The divergence we came with here tonight was for drive width. Now, another version of that could be parking space dimension divergence. Is there a preferred, this is unique because it's an existing site, so there's a finite amount of pavement out there. one way or the other, based on all the information I'm gathering here, is probably gonna be requested. Is there a preference? I've seen it done both ways, and there's a lot of different thought process behind it. One way is you diverge from the parking width, so you kind of suggest people park as close to it as possible. The other option is you would have the divergence in the drive width and keep your parking per code minimum so you don't set a precedent. In my opinion, this is probably gonna need divergence one way or the other. Is there a preference from the commission of what we should plan to request?
No preference, I wouldn't want to make smaller parking. You're saying make smaller parking spots, divergence? I mean, like,
You can either make the parking
Tighter.
space smaller or the drive smaller, because at some point, we only have so much pavement out there. and We're
Right,
not
right.
gonna wanna go into a setback or remove, there's good landscape screening out there. Nobody's gonna wanna take that down. So that pavement edge on the south side, or the west side up against State Route 3 is, I think everyone would agree the best plan would be to maintain.
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants to see more pavement.
I don't know, can we even give a personal preference on this?
Yeah, I think you can, if you want to give them just general directive. You're not agreeing to anything, you're just sort of putting your thoughts on the record. I mean, I think my preference would be a slightly smaller drive aisle, because I still think 23.7 is passable for two vehicles. And sometimes when you make things narrow, it actually causes people to drive safer. I don't think vehicles are getting any smaller in a lot of respects, so I think making the parking space smaller is going to make it uncomfortable and
I would
possibly
agree
more
with that. I would prefer a
difficult.
drive aisle with divergence than a parking space with change. But again, that might be mute based on whatever you come back with a total parking space requirement.
There's more to dive into.
Fine.
I don't make the decisions, I just relay as much information as possible. So that's all I'm gathering here. Okay.
I'm on the same page with Mr. Leff, where if you're gonna have a parking space, it needs to be labeled a parking space. I have a problem not having those end spots not labeled as a parking space, but counting them as a parking space.
Understood.
That's just my opinion.
And one thing I do want to address we kind of discussed a one-way path there on the east side. And I know the more I thought about it, the owner and developer are gonna have issues, because they're gonna want people to go to that gas spot one way or the other based on where their tank site is. So they're not gonna wanna make that one way. I could see that being pushed back to limit that to one way or the other.
You're talking about the east side.
No,
Yes.
you're talking about a drive aisle being a one-way directional, not a gas lane one-way directional.
Sure, but I do think people would be conflicted if there was a do not enter, but they want to pull into their car because their gas tank's on the right. I definitely think,
I wasn't thinking about a sign, I was just thinking about arrows on the ground.
okay.
I guess I share a little bit of that concern with Mr.
That's
Long.
fine.
I think you could put it on a plan, but whether people are practically going to obey it and actually do it, I highly doubt.
I mean, you're talking about a 23.5-foot width now, you're looking at, if you put two parallel spots there, what is it,
It's
9 wide? So take 9 out of that, and you're still at decent distance,
It's
14 feet.
interesting, because I
So-
think this conversation was had many, many years ago. Let me go back to the minutes here real quick.
And like Mr. Carter said.
Because I saw
yeah,
reference
parking
to
there now.
parallel parking in the minutes. At one point, the motion the zoning commission made back in 2001 asked them to remove 2 parallel parking spaces to the east of the canopy. Now, would that be?
That's
That
what
would be, so I bet that's the area. So I bet you there were parallel parking spaces there, and the commission 20 years ago actually told them to take them off the plan.
Joe, what's staff's opinion on that, reducing the spaces like that? I mean, it may be a moot point, like I said, if we determine that the employees might not be an issue, it may reduce it, but what's staff, I'm just curious.
As a general matter, the planning profession as a whole is getting away from parking minimums in a lot of instances, because a lot of parking standards were written basic off of like a Black Friday standard, where like you have these fields of parking that had to be provided for retail shops for one day out of the entire year, and then the other 364 days of the year, they were severely underutilized. And when you have that much parking aesthetically, it doesn't look good. You have all sorts of stormwater and the heat generation and all that. It just, they're no good. And that's why we saw Kroger even several years ago come through and take out a lot of their parking and build that outbuilding out there, or I guess Regency Center technically, because it was an overparked site and they could put that land to better use, and they did. So we also know from a practical matter, Turkey Hill's going to not underpark themselves, probably. It doesn't make business sense for them to do that. Because if they've got a competing gas station nearby that has loads of parking, and people have to make a choice, if prices are equal, well, I'm gonna go to the place where it's way easier to get in and out and park. So it's almost a self-governing issue in a lot of these instances. And a lot of businesses actually have internal parking standards, often that are even higher than township parking standards. So I'm really trying to get us away from over parking sites. Now, this site is a little bit tight because of the restaurant component to it, but also, I don't think if this site is full, people are gonna be pulling off on the side of State Street and parking and walking over the subway. No, number one, there's a bus stop there, and number two, I just don't see people doing it. Way too busy, and it is a safety hazard. So, now, could people start parking on the internal drives and maybe trying to walk somewhere? Maybe, but my guess is they're just not gonna go to Subway. They're gonna pull in and there's nowhere to park. I'm gonna go to Jersey Mike's. So then that becomes, again, a business operations solution that they would have to figure out with, and Subway, I'm assuming, is just leasing and not the owner, so.
I think the subway is driving this because they need so many more parking spots. I'm just thinking, so they're not in Genoa Township, Giant Eagle, there's not that many parking spots over there. In Meyer, you can park straight into the store, and there's a couple, but they don't have very many. Do they have 10, each have 10 parking spots maybe?
At the gas stations?
At the gas stations, that's right.
Yeah,
the
not
gas
a ton.
stations. Yeah,
Not a ton.
not a ton, just as a reference point.
Yeah, the Giant Eagle, I think, for the air pump doesn't even have like a designated parking area. It's just around sort of that widened curve area, and it's always back. People always end up parking along that drive aisle.
Right.
That's why they put 2 air pumps in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you can
What's the,
discuss the uniqueness of the business and reduce to say, okay, you can have this many parking spots and not, because I think that's where we have to end up anyway.
I think staff's only concerned with the reduction of parking, and it's primarily, a lot of it was driven by the fact that when they added the additional vacuums and changed the size of the spaces, that eliminated the parking spaces.
Yep.
So some of it is a little bit self-inflicted in that respect. But something to consider.
resubmission of materials by when?
I guess that's a good question for Mr. Long. Do you think you can have them turned around by a week from essentially today, or is that not gonna be enough time for you?
Let's plan that we'll have it done by then. I will update you by Wednesday if that's not the plan. But
Okay, so I guess knowing that, because, revised plans for the October 11th meeting, which, again, October 11th is a Tuesday meeting because we observe Columbus Day, would be due September 19th, yeah, so a week from today. So if you think you can do it by the 19th, that's what we could put in the motion. I guess if they do have an issue meeting that or don't provide them by that date, they would just have to know that they'll have to submit a request for continuance to November, and then
Yep.
you would have to submit at a later date.
Yep.
But if you want to try to stay on course for the October meeting, yeah, then I would advise.
So
September
it's
19th.
Wednesday.
What?
He's not gonna know till Wednesday. Do we,
no, I will make plans tomorrow, but I want to let, Mr. Schaefer know if I'm not gonna make it, so he can make plans for his, I want to have an internal discussion.
So if you set the date as September 19th tonight, and then he comes to me in 2 days and says, hey, Joe, turns out we're not gonna be able to make the 19th.
Yep.
All he'll do is submit a written request for continuance to me saying, we would like our hearing to be continued to November, understanding we will now owe you materials no later than October 18th. And then during your October meeting, I'd formally present that request to you, and then you would just open the hearing and automatically continue it to the November hearing date. As a matter of procedure.
Okay.
But it sounds like they want to try to make the 19th if they can make it work.
I understand that. Okay. Man, it's a week to turn all that around. It's whether or not, I was just gonna see if we gave them more time, would it be would it be okay or not at this point?
It's really up to, I'm not the one who has to do all the plan revisions. I'll have to review it, but if they get it to me by the 19th, I'll have enough time to review it for October,
All right,
for the
By
schedule.
9/19.
Mr. Chair, I would move to continue the public hearing for the subject final development plan amendment application known as ZC case number 2022-05 until October 11th at 7 PM in the Genoa Township Hall. Additional or revised materials will be due to the Genoa Township Development and Zoning Department by September 19th at 4 PM.
Second.
Discussion? Roll.
Roll call, Mr. Bishop.
Yes.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Mr. Sears. Mr. Welch.
Yes.
Mr. Leff.
Motion passes. It is 8:55. We'll close that portion of the hearing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Second on that?
Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter.
Thank you.
And we all said yes.
You all said yes. I did catch that part.
All right, we've got other business. Discussion of potential zoning resolution amendments. Mr. Schaefer.
So I've tried to keep the commission up to date, so regarding, let's start with the Hoover watershed overlay. The commission, after doing some interviews and meetings, has opted to bring Brochus, Johnson, and Griggs on board to help them with some of the legal questions they had regarding the watershed overlay and the density issue. Mr. Griggs spoke to the board during the regular meeting earlier this month, and that's all recorded and part of the audio, so if you want to hear what he had to say, certainly feel free to pull up that audio and have a listen. Essentially, where the things are heading with the watershed overlay is the board asked me to make a revision to the density numbers in the watershed overlay, the 1.35/1.65, they've asked me to change those numbers to 1.1/1.35. The board's reconvening on September 20th to look at the updated version of that document incorporating that edit, and may take action on the 20th regarding a vote on potential adoption. So obviously, I don't know how the board's going to vote, but it is possible, if the majority is favorable, that that watershed overlay could be adopted as revised as soon as the 20th. Obviously, there's the 30-day waiting period for it to go into effect, so it wouldn't go into effect until October. But so that's what they're doing. I get the impression from the public discussions the board has had that that is most likely a stopgap measure. An alternative avenue they appear to be looking at going down, and one of the reasons Mr. Griggs was brought on board is looking at making changes to the comp plan and subsequently the zoning resolution to put some density recommendation numbers back into the comp plan, and then revising the zoning resolution to make sure that it's consistent with those recommendations, so we don't recreate the conflict that we previously had when numbers used to be in the comp plan. So I'm not exactly sure what those specific numbers will be, because that level of detailed discussion hasn't happened. Some numbers have been thrown out, but there's been no sort of official decision been made. And also the commission, or I'm sorry, the board needs to have a discussion of how they wish to involve this group, the zoning commission. So the board basically has two routes that they can go down, and it's pretty much at their discretion. They could either request this group work on formulating an amendment or amendments to the comp plan and zoning resolution document, that you do all the draft work, draft it up, start the hearings, hold the hearings, and then pass it on to them for review. Or in the alternative, they could go down the path like they did with the Hoover watershed, where they come up with what they would like to see, and then initiate the public hearing process, and then pass it on to you for review and recommendation, and then obviously it would circle back around to them for final discussion. I guess a third route would be formation of some sort of subcommittee that would maybe work to advise the board and come up with those numbers. So I don't know ultimately the direction they're going to go on, down the path. I think more of those discussions are going to happen on the 20th. But so that's where we sort of stand in regards to the Hoover watershed overlay and the density issue. If you have any feedback you'd like me to provide the board in regards to preference or thoughts, I'm happy to do that. I don't think if the board decides to proactively be the ones who put the numbers in and initiate the process, I don't think it has so much to do with lack of faith in the commission. I think it just has more to do with if they do that and initiate the hearing, it automatically puts that item on the agenda, and then the commission has to hear it within a certain time frame. Whereas if they just ask you to do it, that clock doesn't start ticking, and I think they just want to try to make sure. I get the impression that the board is hoping that this can be done relatively quickly, so I think they're trying to find whatever way they think they can get it done. Obviously, want to do it right, but also in a time-efficient manner. So if there's any feedback you'd like me to provide to them, I'm more than happy to do that.
Only question is, if they would approve the Hoover overlay, is that something they can toss out after they fix the?
Yes, yes.
That's not a
So
problem. You can just-
I call it a stopgap measure. Basically, the two options they were looking at, there's obviously the do-nothing option, obviously. The second option would be adopted the overlay. The third option was the idea of a moratorium got thrown around, but based on the feedback that they got from Mr. Griggs during the on-the-record discussions they had with him and during the regular meeting in September, they decided that was not the most prudent route to go down. So they decided the overlay would at least put some controls in place regarding density, at least for some of this area. The concerns with the overlay that they still have, number one, were some of the density numbers, which again, they've suggested a revision to. And number two, there was some concern about how the overlay doesn't cover a lot of planning area 5. So that's why they're looking at possibly an alternative route. There's a strong opinion that they want to try to provide some additional density controls in planning area 5 that the overlay just wasn't allowing for. So I think that's why they're looking at going down a route of making additional changes, noting that if they do make those additional changes, they could then subsequently pass a zoning resolution amendment that repeals
No, so they can do that. I mean,
the
there's
overlay.
not
Yeah, they
something
could
that we're
just,
stuck
they
with.
can put it in and they can just as easily take it out. Where it gets a little sticky is if someone applies while the overlay is in place and utilizes that or is subject to the overlay, then there's some questions there that might have to get figured out. But yes, and anything in that resolution could be put in, and anything, well, within reason, obviously, in legal allowment, but it can subsequently also be removed.
Could the trustees have put the densities into the zoning resolution, went back in, was it 2019 when they harmonized them? Could they have done that at the time, or could they have amended the zoning resolution so we weren't stuck with this issue of we're not knowing exactly where we're going? I mean,
I guess I need to try to understand the question. The trustees can't do that unilaterally. Any amendment to the zoning resolution has to follow the revised code process for amendment, which includes review and recommendation by the commission. At the time, could they have kept the comp plan numbers and changed the zoning resolution? I suppose perhaps they could, but the board at the time, for their reasons, opted to not go down that path.
okay.
I think the record speaks for itself as that's
It'd just be
for the
nice to get
decisions they
fixed
made.
Because it's obviously, there's several different opinions how this whole thing's working. It'd be nice to get that fixed, so when we make decisions, they're based on other things than arguing over zoning resolution comp plans.
And I think that's the desire, is to finally be rid of a lot of that issue that's been hanging over our heads for several years. And obviously, based on some of the feedback we're getting, it sounds like people feel like what had previously been done wasn't sufficient. So that's why we tried to do the overlay, to try to address some of those concerns. And it sounds like that's possibly why the board's thinking about taking another bite at that apple from a different angle to try to further address those concerns they're hearing.
I want to add one comment, because I think I know where you're going with the comment.
Sure.
We have to have one density number for the entire resolution. We could not put different densities in for different areas
Okay.
into the resolution. while they were in the comp plan, we can only have one that oversees the entire area. Then we came up with the overlay piece, which allows us to distinguish specific areas that allow for a different density number, not the
So-
planning areas.
Right, but within the Hoover overlay, that was a single density, is that correct? I mean, you
There's
said
two
that-
densities.
Well, you know, conservation,
Conservation,
non-conservation?
yes.
Right, okay.
So we lowered that number, which is why we went down the road for the overlay, because it was a justifiable piece within a certain, it was a watershed piece.
Yeah, understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our history and your comments before, I wanted to make.
Sure, no, I understand, I completely
You
understand.
can't just, I think you were, what I heard you say there just a minute ago was that you, like, taking the comp plan numbers and putting them
Right.
in as they
And
were,
that's-
and that we knew from all the review and the lawyers, we couldn't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, it
No, I
gets-
appreciate that,
yeah.
actually.
It gets very
Because-
technical, so, yeah. Each the PRD zoning district can't read in such a way where it says in planning area 1, you get this, in planning area 2, you get this, in planning area 3, you get this. All properties subject to PRD have to be treated the same, unless they're subject to the overlay. The overlay was sort of a workaround that legal obstacle that we had. And it's not my obstacle, that's how the revised code is worded, that's just how we have to do it. The alternative route would have been to create several different PRD zoning districts applicable to certain areas of the township, each one reflecting the density for that planning area. We had tried that a little bit before, but candidly, it didn't work, which is why I haven't been advocating going down that route. We used to have PRD 5 for planning area 5, and we used to have the PRRCD for planning area 4. The problem was they were never really stuck to. No one ever actually utilized them, and then the township went ahead and approved just regular PRD in both planning areas 4 and 5. So to me, it became very hard to justify continual existence of both of those districts because we already said PRD was okay there. And now with the relatively small amount of developable land we have left in planning areas 4 and 5, I didn't want to create an oddity zoning district that essentially maybe only addresses 1 or 2 developments left in the township in that side of the water. So to me, it makes just more sense to big picture, try to keep it all within PRD and then utilize the overlay
I
concept.
heard, Mr. Griggs seems to have a way to fix the solution in the zoning resolution, from what I heard him talking about in that meeting. To put the number in there that will work with the densities that are then in the comprehensive plan, which is all the legal thing. It's the same sort of thing, but it's because having read zoning resolutions for all the different townships within Delaware County, a lot of them have low density, medium density, high density PRDs. And,
Yes,
our
some of them do.
agricultural, rural residential, and they're like 1 per 5 acre, 1 per 2 acres, and they go through the densities, and ours are in the middle somewhere. Depends if it's a really rural township versus more of a city township, and we're getting close to be that. But they very specifically did that, and that's why, I think, however it's done, I'm really glad they hired a good lawyer, and I've read a lot of Griggs, information before. If he can fix this so we have it right, and it's what the residents want, what we all feel is correct, that'll just solve a lot of the discussion, get down to what are we doing best for the residents and how we're protecting our residents rather than fiddling around with the legal stuff.
So I guess what I'm looking at in regards to the numbers is, if numbers are put back into the comp plan, the only way I can see this working and not recreating the problem we previously had was that the number in the zoning resolution is gonna have to be reduced to whatever that lowest number in the comp plan is. So you don't have the argument that, well, your comp plan says I can only do 1, but your zoning resolution says I can do 2, and your zoning resolution prevails. So to eliminate that, if your lowest number in your comp plan is 1, your zoning resolution number needs to be 1. So there isn't that conflict. And then knowing if you have an area in your comp plan that allows for higher than 1, you're gonna have to be willing to grant a divergence to density for a plan in that area, with the justification being it's consistent with your comprehensive plan. That's a little bit cleaner way of doing it, because you're also specifying it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and it's unique to that given development, as opposed to trying to worry about this precedence issue that we've sort of been dealing with.
Just a comment, it worked so well before when it was 2.2 max, we had the densities here, all the developers knew it. In the comprehensive plan, they all knew it until Andrew King put out that letter.
Well, it worked until these cluster developments really were not foreseen when that was put together. And it worked because everyone sort of was willing to work together. And when things got a little more contentious and these cluster developments came in and things got a little more controversial, it didn't work. So it was one of those things that probably, in retrospect, maybe should have never been that way, but it wasn't a problem until it was a problem, kind of thing.
Yeah, anyway, that's.
But that's all history at this point, so we're going to try to move forward.
And make it good for our residents.
So I have no comment on how we get it initiated one way or the other. The Board of Trustees has the decision of what they would like to do. We will go forward however they wish to have us go forward.
Yeah, so you're definitely going to be involved at some point, assuming they do something. I just don't know when that will happen. So I'll probably be given more guidance on how the board wants to handle that on the 20th.
Okay. Next thing, we got scheduled for 2023.
Yeah, I don't necessarily need you to take action on this tonight, although it is nice to just get it out of the way, and then that way, if I start talking to people who are thinking about submitting in 2023, I can start providing them dates.
I appreciate Mr. Leff's consideration of the national championship game.
Absolutely. Because that would be like.
A second.
Run into it before. It's been an issue.
No, that was a great.
Luckily, Joe and I have had conversations about it.
Every year they make the playoff, I always have to email the chair and say, what do you want to do about the meeting?
We're gonna move it.
No, but, I mean, if it's Alabama Clemson, I'd like to watch that.
Well, and that's what I sort of told Mr. Leff when he and I were talking about it, was even if Ohio State's not in it, it's almost akin to having a meeting during the Super
Right,
Bowl.
exactly.
Especially in Columbus, which is always like at the top of the college football rating. So as ridiculous as that sounds, I think we're just being reasonable or practical.
Smart. I think I was way ahead on that. That was good.
Motion to approve it?
The only other one I know, I've got a conflict in July. We had a conflict every July. I don't, if everybody is fine with that July date, then I have no.
We can always change it later.
Change it.
We did change it this
This
past
year,
year, this past July, because of what was on, what we were dealing with. And just so we had enough sitting people who had heard previous comments, so. But I don't, we can deal with that when we get to it again if we need to.
I mean, that is why we have a vice chair and
But
alternates.
Vice chair, and now we have, Chip gets to have fun with that.
Assuming he's vice chair next year. We don't know how that's going to go.
I could get voted off the
Sarah
island.
did do a wonderful job of running that meeting, so it was good. She did.
Yeah, we do have rules of procedure in place that we'd be able to.
But
Deal with
nobody
that.
else had any other conflicts that we need to
Buddy,
worry
I'm
about
just an
now.
alternate, I'm along for the ride.
Unless there's any proposed changes, I'll make a motion to adopt the 2023 Genoa Township Zoning Commission Schedule Draft Number 2,
Yeah, sent out September 8th.
sent out September 8th of 2022.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes.
And if we later find a problem with it, well, we can just
Well,
amend it.
we are to public comment. Seeing none. Any other comments from up here?
The PRD, there's no requirement for fences, is there?
Fences, what fences?
I mean, every PRD I've ever seen has a fence around it, but I cannot find anything under PRD that
No,
says you
it's
have
just
to
one of
have a
those
fence.
things, especially in Highland Lakes, they like to do, and it just matched the
I mean, it
aesthetics
all-
of the
It
area.
looks good. Grace's Place is really nice. They did that, you know, they mounded, put trees up and all that. I'm just curious if that's on a list of, I don't know if you're keeping a list of, maybe we're gonna have zoning resolution updates someday. The
Well,
other
there's
thing-
always a list of that.
Well, I figured so. Well, would you throw that in there for me? The other,
Look at it for consideration, sure.
yeah, well, I mean, because we do try to, we run into things, it'd be nice to fix them. The other thing that, with these, the little houses that they're putting in the cluster, or whatever you want to call them, is it 70 by 120, 60 by 120? Is that the
I
60
think
by
it's
120?
60 by 120 is our minimum building
Minimum
area
lot.
for them.
Yeah, with parking on only one side, and then we have these short driveways. Can we put in the zoning resolution, you need to be able to park 4 cars in your driveway? Is that something we want to do? Vinmar Reserve, because they got a little bit wider, they put those side-load garages, and then they put that one single one in, and it just makes the development look nicer. I don't know if anybody else feels that way about it, but a lot of times you just have 2 spots for parking in front of your house.
2 in the garage and 2 in the drive.
Right, but I was
4
just.
total cars.
4 total, but I'm thinking 4 in the driveway.
There's a, I can do that.
Now we're getting way out of
Yeah, probably so, but it's just, maybe we'll discuss it later. It's just, I just look at these new ones and the little ones that are going in, and it's just, okay, then people, a lot of people don't park in their garage, because it gets cluttered, but, then there's one side of the street, and if you have a party and people come home and they can't park, et cetera, and a lot of people have kids too, so.
Yeah, we don't obviously dictate the on-street parking issue. They're not required to provide one-sided on-street parking. It's just, that's all dictated by the width of the street in Delaware County street design standards, whether or not, where they're allowed to have public park or on-street parking. To answer the general question of can you set driveway design standards in a PRD, yes, I think you can.
It's just for, everybody to think about it, because if you've driven through them, sometimes if there's not parking, the streets are crowded, it looks crowded. That's all.
Adjourn at
9:16?
9.
And I would note for the record that our next meeting is Tuesday, October 11th, 2022 at
There we
7
go.
PM.
So, yeah, next meeting, Tuesday, October 11th, 7 PM in this room. We have a continued motion from this evening. Joe, is there anything else known?
No, we didn't receive any other rezoning or development plan applications for the October meeting. So as of right now, it'll just be the continued hearing for Turkey Hill.
No sidewalk requests, nothing else?
No sidewalk request? No, sir.
Okay. We have a motion to adjourn. We have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Done. Meeting